Welcome to Realcast, the weekly roundup of the real asset markets. I'm joined this morning by Nicole and Dan Innes. Dan, let's start with you. What are the stories you've been following over the week?
Across the markets, we've been watching a bit of residential news. Last week, Blackrock formed a joint venture with real estate manager Outpost to invest 500 million into UK Resi. This newly created venture, they've just acquired a property in London, 101 Camberley Street, which is going to seed the venture, and they've acquired that from LabTech. The assets, it's actually alongside King's Cross and St Pancras, which gives you a bit of an indication as to what kind of focus they're going to have. That's comprising about 120 residential units, but along with about 30,000 square foot of flexible commercial space as well. BlackRock hope that Camberley Street is going to really sort of benefit from a tenant's sort of desire to easily access things, not just around King's Cross from a travel perspective, but also that area's kind of burgeoning life science and technology scene around there, especially given that things like the Francis Crick Institute is just around the corner. Elsewhere, and continuing with that Resi theme, Greystar, who are, of course, the largest apartment operator in the US, they've actually announced they've completely sold off its interest in a portfolio of 30 multifamily properties in the US for $3.6 billion. And Ivanhoe Cambridge, they've bought that portfolio, and that sports around 10,000 units in locations right across the Sun Belt in the US. Ivanhoe Cambridge, Montreal based, they've already had a bit of a stake in that portfolio, but this deal was essentially a bit of a recapitalization as well. Eastdil Secured advised Greystar as part of that deal, which did include multiple bidding rounds, a number of leading institutional investors as undisclosed, battling for that portfolio. But over the last few months, Greystar, they've been launching new housing construction projects to add to its mammoth sort of 220 billion portfolio, which spans 200 markets right across the globe, including a 21-story apartment tower in Chicago. Talking about sort of global events, one of the good news stories we saw was that some momentum is building for MIPIM, which is, of course, next March, in that all of the major real estate agents have kind of signed up now to MIPIM, which is really positive sentiment. So that's people like CBRE, Colliers, Cushman, JLL, Knight Frank, Savills. They've all made firm commitments to exhibition stands and to have a big delegation down there. And lastly, Facebook, quickly off the heels of the Meta rebrand, they're already in discussions to open physical stores around the world, and that's for the very first time. But this real kind of online to offline kind of trend, and really the need to reach customers in a more meaningful way. They're kind of hoping that it's going to really sort of build on their ability to sell their virtual reality products. So you can see how bricks and mortar is really working hand in hand with the online market. The shops are going to showcase the devices made by Facebook's Reality Labs division. If you're just thinking about Facebook being a way to keep in touch with your friends, then you really need to dig deeper, because there's so much within that business, and of course across the virtual reality elements of Meta. But the plans have already been in the making now for several months, but no opening dates as yet. But while Facebook has launched some pop-up stores in airports and US department stores to kind of show off its hardware, this would be the first attempt to open permanent locations around the world. I mean, other tech giants are better known for their online presence and have also opened physical stores in recent years, like Amazon with their Amazon Fresh, quickly followed by many of the supermarket groups. But interesting to see Facebook coming into the bricks and mortar world, Richard.
Yeah, it's really interesting that changeover in terms of traditional retailers. You mentioned there MIPIM as well, and we'll be at MIPIM with the International Investors Lounge for the first time in 2022. Obviously, that's something we've been successfully running at Expo Real for the last few years, so that'll be coming to Cannes for the first time. Nicole, what have you been tracking?
Well, Dan was mentioning the transformation of retail, and there was some really interesting research just published by CBRE Investment Management saying the physical retail is set to make a big comeback. The research is called Clicks to Bricks, Physical Retail as a Solution to Digital Deterrence. And basically it says there are two reasons why people are turning back to physical stores. One is the increasing costs of e-commerce, both logistics has been successful, as we know, and costs have been rising, and also environmental reasons. Consumers are more and more aware aware of the impact of transport, of delivery, last mile hubs, and so on. So there seems to be a shift. CBRE thinks that even the big online retailers, not to mention the omnichannel, are going to focus more and more on shops, both for cost reason and environmental reason. They say the digital retail is becoming ever more competitive. And so omnichannel operators and larger online-only retailers will look to assets that are experiential, and they can serve as advertising platform for their wares, just like Facebook is doing, and also fulfillment centers. So that's an interesting perspective on retail. Another Real Asset Media did a really interesting interview with Lisette van Doorn, the CEO of ULI Europe. They have just presented their research report on emerging trends in Europe. And there's a really interesting and worrying, possibly, discrepancy between, she said, optimism has really come back lately to the real estate sector. People are really optimistic about the huge volumes of capital that are ready to be deployed and huge interest in all sectors. So she said it's almost as if the pandemic never happened because of this dynamism and this optimism. But on the other hand, when they ask people about their longer term views, so 3 to 5 years, there's a lot of pessimism. People are very uncertain about the future, uncertain about the economic recovery. And also in the real estate sector in particular, they're uncertain about this need that everyone's talking about to transform the industry, and yet not knowing how to go about it. So she said that the industry hasn't come to grips with sort of this organizational transformation that is much needed in practical terms. And so all these questions, Lisette says, are very much out in the open. The environmental sustainability obviously has been very much in the news because of COP26 and because of pressure from everyone in the sector. And there are two examples of interesting news that came out recently. And one is, we've often talked about Milan being a shining example of urban regeneration in Europe. The city has already been transformed, but there are a lot of projects still ongoing. In fact, there are projects in the pipeline worth 13 billion euros over a gross area of 4.3 million square meters still happening. And so it is fitting that it was in Milan that Bocconi University, which is a private business university in Milan, has launched the Sustainable Urban Regeneration Lab, which is going to be a center of excellence collecting data to study and promote urban regeneration at a global level. And it's been supported by big names in the real estate sector like Prelius and like Heinz, and also Banca Intesa San Paolo, which is Italy's biggest bank. And on the sustainability front, a really interesting development is vertical farming in urban areas, which is set to be the new frontier of sustainability. And the Greenman Group, which is a grocery-anchored real estate manager in Germany, it is based in Berlin, and it's created this new company called Potager Farms, which is dedicated to urban farming, which obviously these are buildings in urban centers to reduce food miles. And they use no pesticides. They grow vegetables and herbs and leafy greens and so on, usually in tower structures, and using very advanced farming techniques. So they're growing crops without soil and maximizing growth in a very confined space. They're going to start in Germany, but they have ambitious plans to roll it out. And the interesting thing is that the farms are cooperating with IGS, which is a Scottish-based technology which was developed in Scotland. And basically they came up with this technology that allows them to build these vertical farms to grow both food, pharmaceutical and fragrance markets around the world. And the technology has already been deployed across 4 continents. So that's a really interesting, it's a German project, but very much a Scottish success story.
Yeah, we were in Glasgow, obviously, with Impact Magazine and running a session there focused on investment in sustainability in urban areas and the built environment for the cities and regions, and an urban environment day there. And I went to see the vertical farm there. Really interesting to see how that was working and the technology behind it. COP26, I thought was very interesting in terms of the trends, to be able to see what was happening there, because for sure a lot of those trends are going to be playing out in the real asset and real estate markets over the next months and years for certain. So really interesting to do that, and I know that we'll be following up on some of the interviews that we did there over the next week. Thanks very much, Nicole. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week for our regular roundup of the week in real assets.